My name is Allison Felis, and this is I'll Follow You, a podcast featuring light and lively conversations about film, music, and creative culture, coming to you from the People's Republic of Rogers Park on the far northeast side of Chicago. Welcome to the coronavirus special. Okay, not really. But if you're taking your social distancing seriously, and for the sake of the most vulnerable among us, I hope that you are, you might suddenly find yourself with a bit more time on your freshly washed hands. Hopefully, this week's episode, featuring my dear friend, the artist Keiler Roberts, will be a balm and a welcome hour's worth of distraction. Keiler has been writing autobiographical comics for 10 years. Her 6 books include Sunburning, Chlorine Gardens, and most recently, Rat Time, all 3 of which were published by Koyama Press. Her self-published autobiographical comic series, Powdered Milk, received an Ignatz Award for Outstanding Series in 2016, and in 2019, Chlorine Gardens received Slate's Cartoonist Studio Prize for Best Print Comic of 2018, which was selected by the Slate Book Review and the Center for Cartoon Studies. Her work has been included in the Best American Comics in 2016 and 2018, and was mentioned on their Notables list for 2014. Her work has been featured in numerous gallery exhibitions, including a solo show in Northern Ireland at the Naughton Gallery at Queen's University Belfast, curated by Ben Crothers. She has taught at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago since 2013, and lives in Evanston, Illinois, with her husband, the artist Scott Roberts, their daughter Zia, and perhaps the most famous cartoon pet since Snoopy, their dog Crooky. This week on the show, Keiler and I talk about the thrill of the possibility of failure, embracing disorganization, the difficulties that arise when you try to do an unnameable activity, why telling someone just be yourself can be bad advice, and the difference between a story that's funny to tell and a story that's funny to draw. And now, my conversation with Keiler Roberts. So, hi, Keiler. Thank you so much for being with me, socially isolated in our respective homes today.
Hi, Allison. Thank you so much.
Well, I was joking with Brian in the past few days when we had booked this and we were talking about what we were going to talk about, and I was like, oh yeah, should I just do in a matter of 15 seconds all of the boring questions that Keiler usually gets asked, tell me about autobio, tell me about being a mom artist, not that they're boring questions, but I'm sure you're sick of answering them.
Yeah, make a list of the cliches. I mean, that's kind of good advice for students, is try to do all the cliche projects right now in the first week, just to get it out of your system and to be aware of what they are. So yeah, really quickly, being a mom is hard. Being an autobiographical artist, you have to think about what you're doing. But I do actually, I've never made that assignment about doing cliches on purpose, but I do start my class out and say make a bad drawing right away. Our first critique, we're going to all sit down and make a bad drawing for 20 minutes and then hang it up and talk about them, or try to make the easiest drawing you can imagine. The laziest or whatever, because you spend so much time as an artist, avoiding the things you're afraid of, thinking what if I am cliche, or what if I am boring or stupid? And if you just try to do that thing right away on purpose, it actually it really clarifies the question. You know then what a bad drawing is or what a cliche is. And a lot of times they try to make a bad drawing and they're not. And then we get to talk about oh, well, why is this actually kind of interesting? Because it's hard. It's the intent to be interesting and original and creative is often what makes people boring. Because they fall into patterns of exaggeration, you know, like they're trying too hard. And when somebody's trying too hard, like there's like a little bit of desperation, you know? Um,
Yeah.
but this is, I didn't let you ask any questions. This is exactly like how I teach. It's just like, it's a dam breaking in the morning. I think I have nothing to say, and then I let loose, and I carry on for a really long time. And I never know where I'm going. But I feel like I just, it, I embrace it and just realize like that's the way I am, and it's not worse than I would be if I were just like trying to rein it in and be more linear.
Well, that's like literally exactly what like the lesson that you were just giving to your students. Like try not to overthink it and just like lean into like what you think is bad and or good about it, you
Exactly.
know, and then just like let it fly. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, actually, and that's I really did want to talk to you about your practice as an instructor because I think that I mean that's got to be such a rich sort of thing in your life as far as you know in the flow of like the way that things go outward, you know, out of your own experience, but then in what you're learning then from the students and or what gets sort of internally clarified for you as you try to like sort of explicate to them like, oh, this is what I think about art. So yeah, I mean there's not there's not really a question in that that's like well defined, but yeah, it's like bad interviewer question. But yeah, I would love to just hear you talk more about actually, yeah, like what being a working artist and being a teacher, how that feels like to you these days.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been teaching for, I don't know, it's got to be close to 20, since 2002, 18 years. Um, well, and I was a TA, so really like 20 years. And it really has changed like every 5 years or so. You know, it's like a totally different, um, it feels like a different job. And part of that is, you know, I switched schools several times, and, you know, the community of every school is different. But I mean, I used to just have like a completely different approach. And it was probably closer to like how I was taught, where things were organized and there's a slideshow and a lecture. And I spent so many years like putting together these really careful, articulate lectures. And I think I was doing a good job, but after I gave the same lecture like, you know, 10 times, no matter how good it was, I could see my students like glaze over, you know, because it's not, they don't have the intensity of my anxiety when it's something I know exactly what I'm going to say for the next slide and the next slide. It becomes like watching a video, like there's sort of nothing at stake, and you have a
Mm.
feeling like it's not crucial. And I think like for students, um, not just students, but audience members, like the thrill of a live event, a live lecture, a live performance is like somebody's probably going to screw up. And like that keeps you engaged, you know? And so, like, I remember the things my teachers said in high school when they were wrong. Um, those are the things that stuck with me like more than anything. Things that would be like, that can't possibly be true, or that's like a totally misapplied analogy, you know? Um,
I
and
have a friend who always says like she will never forget that like a teacher of hers once slipped and said like, "Does anyone have a nugget? I mean a suggestion?" And she was like, "A nugget?"
That's really cute. A nugget.
But I mean, a nugget sort of works. I mean, I guess she was thinking like a chicken McNugget, but I guess a nugget of wisdom too
Yeah,
is applicable. Yeah. Anyway.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, I've definitely used the wrong word, but never like in such a charming way, probably. But but anyway, it's yeah, just like, so I'm embracing like disorganization more, you know, and
Mm.
like my main I'm trying to take my writing style in comics, which is organized, but it's totally spontaneous, and like the order is sort of applied later. Um, and like the things that I thought were really like holding me back, in terms of like structure and clarity and planning, I just realized like I really hate planning for so many different reasons, and so I'm just not going to do it anymore, and just like
Mm.
totally trust that like I've been teaching so long, all the content that I need to do for this course is going to come up at spontaneous times. It's all going to be like put in because I do have enough awareness to like look and say, okay, we're on week 13. I guess we haven't talked about this, so maybe I'll start that conversation. But most of the things come up spontaneously just in group conversations about a book or about critique. So instead of planning a lecture on the use of value or, rhythm or composition or whatever, I'll just see something in critique that will trigger, that idea and say, now we're going to talk about rhythm because this is a perfect example of it. Do you see this? And just like wait for all these appropriate things to happen. And it's fun and things do go wrong, but sometimes the things that go wrong are so much better than anything I would have intended. I was teaching once at DePaul a few years ago, and I was like becoming more aware of my difficulty in sort of like keeping track of everything, and so I would write just a list of words on the chalkboard. And it was just for me so that I could stay on track. It was like just like almost a grocery list of things I intended to cover during that demonstration or lecture. And I had written, it was about perspective and all these terms for perspective. And then I wrote bad drawing. And I was going to talk about like what makes a bad perspective drawing, as part of my lecture. And I was demonstrating, and this always happened to me. Like I'd start a perspective drawing with, one piece of like white chalk, on the chalkboard, and all the lines, all the guidelines would look too much like the main lines, and it would just become like this intense grid of lines that I didn't use a ruler for, that were not straight, that were meandering all over and overlapping, that suddenly it just looked like a spider web, instead of a staircase. And this would happen, over and over. I was in one of those situations where suddenly like I couldn't find the line that I was looking for, and it all just like turned into this abstract total mess on the board. And I'm, standing in front of the class, like telling them how to draw this thing. And I just I took 2 steps back and just started laughing. And I looked at the list of words, and where it said bad drawing, I just made an arrow from that to my drawing. And I just said, this was all planned. It looked like it was. And like, that's, when I was writing my, thesis paper at Northwestern about artwork, I was trying to, I ended up cutting all of this out because it didn't make sense to people, but I still kind of believe in the idea. I was trying to make a comparison for like why something that's almost failing is better to watch. It's more exciting. And I was saying my paintings are like that. They're always like, oh, that works, but it's like, so there are many things wrong with it too. It's like so close to like not working. And I was watching those shows, Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. And then there was a guy, Jeff Corwin, that like caught snakes over and over again. And I was really into these 2 shows, because they were catching snakes or crocodiles. And Steve Irwin was like, you never knew for sure if he was safe, like there was so much struggle in his, he had the clear potential to fail, and it was much more spontaneous, and it was a much better show because of it. But Jeff Corwin was simply too good. It was like, you never felt like he was in danger. He was totally an expert and would just pick up the snake and whatever. And I don't want to be an expert. People will never feel that way when they look at my drawings like, oh, here is a master. They will never, but they will have like the tension of like, this is almost a disaster, and that's the way I teach. It's the way I live. I mean, you have to have like faith in your ability to problem solve like in the moment and reconstruct, and also like just understanding that the stakes, I'm not catching snakes or crocodiles, like the stakes are pretty low. But I've like, I mean, this gets back to parenting too, like and being an artist and everything, like understanding how to let go of the things that went wrong. And I don't know how much that depends on like not looking back too much, or forgiving yourself or whatever. But that's like the most crucial skill that I have had to use in all of those things. Like when I have a big fight at home, with Zia, or something is mishandled. You just have to keep being a mom and just like realize like nothing has actually been destroyed, and that's, with teaching, definitely the same thing in comics too. Like I'm not one of those people who feels the need to go back and make a bunch of revisions and edit the heck out of things. Like when it's done, I almost always accept it, and just like accept that there's gonna always be some awkwardness in it and stuff like that. And like I lose my train of thought all the time, and I do it especially when I'm teaching, because I'll just start talking about all the things that are popping into my head. And I don't. It's like now. I used to just like freeze up and feel like totally confused and frozen, deer in headlights when it would happen, and then get insecure, like, oh God, I forgot that thought. Now and my brain is melting. But now it's like I wave, in my head to the train, like, oh well, goodbye. You're not gonna, you're not gonna come. That's all right.
Well, and I had that experience as a musician. I don't remember a couple years ago, or just continually having this experience where, I internally inside my own brain, if I'm singing or doing whatever, and I just think like, oh, I have to do it perfect, and it needs to be right, and like, and it needs to be clean, and all these punitive things that make me so clenched up that I'm probably not gonna do a good job anyway because I'm so like freaked out about it.
Yeah.
But then like when I stop and like think about the art that I respond to most, like as a listener, it's like, of course I love the people who are masters and who just make it sound effortless and it's so beautiful and so unique and whatever. But a lot of what I love is like when you hear the character and the quirks, like there's
Right.
if there's a recording that I'm listening to where, you can hear the drummer, put his foot down onto his hi-hat like right before he plays. And so it like tinks a little bit. You hear like a little click,
Mm-hmm.
and then he starts playing. It's like I love that character. Or when someone like if their voice wobbles a little bit, or I wrote recently a little bit about like, Bjork, who obviously has like an amazing voice, but I think so much of what people respond to in her as a singer is the way that she shows. You can hear her body, you hear gasps, you hear mouth noises, you hear there's one song on like one of her earlier albums where you hear her breathe in like through a phrase, and that's the stuff that's so revealing and so precious. And so I'm like, if it's good enough for Bjork, why can't that be good enough for me? Like, why can't I be open enough about like the vulnerabilities and just letting the simplicity of letting my singing come through?
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's a long way around of saying, like the vulnerability of the line, that your hand makes, that's what's interesting to me, in looking at art or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a good sort of like teachable thing that like without even teaching it to your students, I'm sure that they're learning that from you, in those moments of just sort of being like accepting of all of yourself,
Yeah. Although, I mean, who knows what they're learning. And like we all, I think, like with perfectionism, people are not, there are some people who obviously seem to be perfectionists like in every area, or it's like they are just in their work and it's like very apparent. I am in ways that drive me crazy. I mean, the perfectionist tendencies, I think, they're like massively destructive. But it's like, you know, we all have our arena, and mine is like, don't waste time.
Mm.
You know, like, and I think that's probably pretty common. Um, and I felt that way when Zia was a baby. It was like, okay, if I needed to always have like a focused activity that's nameable, and like I'm giving her a bath now. I'm feeding her now. I'm taking her for a walk, and it was all these like activities that were, that had like rules and limits and, you know, whatever. And then it was like the spaces in between. It was like, I don't know what to be doing with my baby right now, because it's like very unclear. And I felt that way. I mean, you feel that way at a job, like if you have a service industry job and it's a slow lull, you know, and your boss is there, you're supposed to just be like looking busy because there's actually nothing to do, you know, that pressure of like feeling like it's very unclear what to do. Um, and with um, I think people just have a really hard time with like that time in life, you know, when they're not getting something done, but they're also not enjoying themselves, because that's the way our society is constructed. It's like you're either working on your work, you're working on something that's going to pay off later, you know, like you're cleaning the house now so that it'll be clean and you won't have to do it this weekend or whatever. You're running errands now. Or you're consciously having like quality enjoyment time, you know,
Yeah.
where you go to a coffee shop or whatever, like you do this activity that's sort of like not interrupted, you know, and you're having a good time. But I like more and more and more, I have spent all this time like not really doing anything in particular. And I've gotten like it's extremely uncomfortable at first, you know, because even my mind, who wants everything to be defined, it's like, okay, I'm okay sitting here doing nothing because it's meditating and I know what that is, and it's all these things that I'm being mindful. But then it's like, okay, am I actually meditating, or am I just like sitting here being anxious for an hour? You know, or am I, you know, if I'm checking my phone like every few minutes and reading an article here or there, then I'm not really meditating. So I'm not really doing nothing, but I'm also not really doing something, and I'm not really resting, but I'm also not having fun and enjoying like my free time. You know, that starts like making me really crazy. But I've gotten better at like accepting that time can pass with like no proof of something good happening, and it's okay. It's just our, I think we feel like this scarcity of time, but it's not a scarcity of time. It's insecurity about like the quality of what's happening in our head at all times.
Mm. Well, and I think that you have harnessed that like in your work, because it's like that's you know, so much of what I love about your comics is like is your ability to focus on these like weird elbow moments of life, you know, where it's like it's sort of between things, and yet you're able to like bring out this like this quality where in focusing on these sort of like in between moments, yeah, it's sort of like you're sort of giving your readers like permission to like acknowledge that life is more than just like peak productivity or peak enjoyment, like. And so I think
Right.
that's a really beautiful beautiful aspect of what your perspective brings, I think, in your work in a really amazing way.
Thank you. I mean, it's definitely my, I am trying to point out those times, but um, I mean, it comes from like this real struggle of constantly accepting those times. But I think I wanted to, um, I do want to watch for, you know, that like sort of nothing in between and waiting and passing time and all that stuff. The like I'm always trying to avoid sort of the obvious focal point. Um, and think partly, um, well, it comes from a few things. The that like realism movement in painting, realism with like a capital R with Courbet and Manet, is like a period of time where painting for the first time like didn't have an obvious focal point, and so you'd be looking at a picture and like totally insignificant things would be like the most colorful or the most eye-catching, or the focal point might not be placed in an obvious place. It might be like near the corner, and it got more and more pushed around after that. And so I think about, there's lots of people who do this, lots of filmmakers, lots of contemporary artists, where it's, you really allow the audience to like pick their own, like what they get from it is more different from person to person. And it's not about like the point you're trying to make, I'm not attached to creating like a very particular like meaning, it's like, do you get it or not? That kind of thing. And when I think about, like, I'll get all riled up, I'll read something and see something, or I'll feel really inspired. I'll be like, oh, I really want to say this thing, tell the story. So it makes this point. And then as soon as I start thinking like, how am I going to go about this? How am I going to write this? I feel really tired and bored, and it's like, no, I don't have that thing to say or to articulate or whatever. Like, it doesn't actually even matter what I believe about that thing. And I certainly don't need to convince other people of it. But the more it gets into like this, like sense of absurd, I want to make people laugh, and so they do have to get something in particular, they have to like understand my sense of humor to get that. So it's not like I am trying to create meaning, but I'm not trying to like make people believe in my point of view necessarily. I guess my point of view is just that like there isn't one meaning, or that like our sense of what's significant is not as universal as it's portrayed,
And so looping back around to like your experience in the classroom, like how does have you found a way to like teach that to your students? Like, because it's, that's what a person like, sort of the cliche of like, being a teacher is like, well, I'm going to go in and I'm going to teach these kids what I know. But like, how does that, how do you work that like in the classroom?
I am constantly telling them not to believe me or trust me or take my opinion too seriously.
That's awesome.
It changes every semester, first of all, and it's like directly influenced by what I'm going through at the moment, but I'm basically like, my goal as a teacher is to have them be more observant and to be better at critical thinking. So you can't teach those things by teaching your belief, my belief about comics or what it should be. It's really like, oh, do you feel that way? Do you have that opinion? Why? Is it like, and they all should have different opinions about things. And I always point out like when rules are broken. So, there's like design rules and a lot of rules about writing, like my daughter will come home from third grade and say, we learned that a story is either, a circle or it has a moral, or it's, she's learning these formal things, about a traditional fictional story arc and how an essay works. And these things are generally true. But then you see like a really great piece of writing that breaks all those rules, that ends without resolution, or that, starts at a different place in the story. And I've always loved art, all the arts, when I feel like a major rule has been broken and it's successful and interesting. I'm just trying to get my students to like find their own authentic voice and do their own thing. And I can't obviously tell them how to do that. I have tips, for how to get more in touch with themselves, but basically, and there are tips that you can share with people for how to become more observant, things like that. But we just look at a bunch of things and they just have to make things. For students of all art disciplines and writing, there is absolutely no substitute for just doing the work and looking at your own work and learning from the process. And even if you're not trying to get better, if you write a whole comic, if you write a 100-page book, you're going to change. You're going to figure things out that you didn't even try to figure out just because you actually did the work. It's just going to happen. You don't have to worry about anything. You just do it. If you're feeling bored, you're not going to finish that project. Well, that you don't have to like criticize it in the right way or learn from critique. Like you just feel like, God, I'm bored with this. So then you stop. It's not, it doesn't have to be more complex than that. But yeah, just so like even basic writing advice, like I don't think it's funnier when things are exaggerated a lot of times, like in comics, a lot of times like the characters will have like these, big wide eyes and mouth, gasp, I can't believe this is happening, or, this overreaction. And my work, is very deadpan. It's very much about like not reacting to things. But that's just like my device for humor. There are people who use exaggeration really well in comics, so I don't think anything is off limits or like can't be done. A lot of people have these pet peeves about like a typed font, or I don't know, if they like panels or like whatever it could be. I have seen comics break every possible rule that I've tried to like make in my head that have done it successfully. I mean, I hate certain genres. I really like don't ever want to read something that's about like the apocalypse, or war. I mean, like obviously there are really good comics. Like I read Mouse, but there are people who are going to do things that are so good and so interesting that I'll get over my own, biases and hatreds. And that's really great. You just have to do what you want to do and trust your voice, I guess. But that's also terrible advice, because like, it's like telling an insecure middle schooler, like, to go to the dance. All you have to do is be yourself. Well, it's not true, because if you're awkward, you go to the dance and be your awkward self. Here's what's going to happen. Nobody's going to want to hang out with you. But if you fake it and act like a better person, also nobody's going to want to be with you because you're being fake. There are situations where if you're authentic and true to yourself, you're not going to be successful or liked. Like there are people who are making totally authentic comics and they're not getting published. It's just it's unfair. I mean, that's, I don't know what the solution there is, it's just like, it's just hard.
Well, it's finding, I mean, because that's art, right? It's like, it's taking the prosaic and like you put it through some indefinable filter, and then on the other side of that, there's something that may or may not be valuable to a reader, right? I mean, but so exaggeration, like, and that's, and your sensibility against exaggeration, like, I love that about your work so much. Like, I just will never forget one of the first of your comics that I ever read, one of your mini comics. I think it was one of the ones probably that you had just self-published and put in at Quimby's. And like, once I was reading your work and like finding like locking into that sensibility that you have. And I just remember like the first time that I like laughed out loud, like Brian and I were living in our old apartment, and just I was laying on the couch and I hit one of your punchlines, and it was so, I'll just never forget it, because it was so deadpan, and it made this like thunk in my brain in the best way, where it was like this like anti punchline, and like I just cherish that about your work so much. And so I would just like love to hear your theory of like comedy, like, because I think that's you're so funny, and like, and that's, I mean, I think that's what everyone, I mean, I think people who really love your work, I mean, there's a lot to love in your work, but I think that's one of the signposts that people are like, yes, Keiler is so funny, but it's such your own voice. And so, yeah, I would just love to hear you talk about how you incorporate that and how you sort of like develop that voice, and like what your what you sort of try, quote unquote, try to achieve with the comedy.
Well, thank you. It's like, I mean, that means so much to me to hear you say that. That's like very touching, and like I mean, I'm so happy that anybody like thinks that. And if, it's like definitely what I strive for. But I feel like there are a lot of people who like don't find me funny and don't get it, and that's okay too. I don't like. What I'm saying is that I want to answer your question, but I am totally aware of the fact that I don't have all the like. I'm not like, it's. I want to do it in a modest way, like I think I do have an understanding of how, like, what kind of content works in what format. When I tell a story that I'm trying to like get my friends to laugh, like I do have there's not that much overlap in the content. A funny story that's funny to tell is a very different thing than something that's funny to draw. And there's also like funny photographs, so I know like which medium is gonna sort of work for things. And with comics, like it is about like drawing things in a funny way, like the way you can draw somebody's hands or their posture or just like really subtle facial expressions, or even the way you compose like objects on a table. Like I do make things look a little bit awkward. And also I think like they're fairly realistic, but not slick, like, and that's partly because like I just don't have the ability to draw in a really slick way. And I don't know if that's because of the way my hands work or my brain works. Like I'm not actually very good at visualizing things or storing visual information. So if somebody says like, oh, why don't you draw this restaurant that you've been to 50 times? I can't remember what the light fixtures look like or what style chairs there are, or, what you were wearing this morning or whatever. So like it's kind of automatically limiting, and that makes things look more awkward. Like somebody who's really, really good at realism and can sort of like have this like data bank, and it has the hand control to draw things in a really slick, perfect way. They can't just like naturally draw in a funny way, without trying. But because I'm not like good at that kind of drawing, I can draw a funny hand just because I'm just trying to draw a hand, and it comes out funny, and so, I mean, that works to my advantage. But I think it's also like because I use this like realistic style, things are funnier when they're awkward than they would be if I used a more cartoonish style. The awkwardness wouldn't have kind of the impact. Like reality is what makes things funny. Like I think a lot of my humor wouldn't work as well in fiction either, because it would be like, it sort of depends on the fact that it really truly happened. Like when I was writing what my daughter said as a child, it's funny because it's exactly what she said, her phrasing and whatever. So
I'm just going to like put a sidebar here and say that like the number of times that Brian and I say to each other, like, this house is getting naughtier and naughtier.
That's
the line.
Yeah. It's the household slogan. Oh my God. Things were getting really naughty here last night. There was a lot of screaming. Yeah. And I think it's also like the phrasing. Well, okay. So, I mean, humor also is like, I do get embarrassed about things, but I think my threshold, like I'm willing to not be embarrassed by like maybe more things than the average person. So like I can draw myself, naked, or, I mean, the Rat Time has a story where I'm like trying to take a tampon out and it like goes flying across the room. I'm trying to like clean up blood while my pants are off and all this stuff, which was like, that's a story that can work like orally and in comics, but not in photography. But it's like some people would definitely not, like, they would find that too embarrassing to share with people, and I don't. So that's like one of the things that just like having a sense of openness, and like I'm not that protective about myself. I think that I'm willing to do it if it's funny. Like that's the thing. Not that that's like such a noble cause, but like that's the reason for me. Like people will make sacrifices or spend money on things or whatever because they really like that's the reward. To me, doing something that's funny that would, maybe make somebody laugh, that is the highest reward I could get. That's higher to me than money, than fame, than success, than whatever. Like when my dad, reads my comics, like he giggles the whole time. He likes, because he's able to laugh at himself, and he also loves to laugh at my mom, and he laughs at the way I draw. Like he makes fun of me for it all the time. But like in a, a nice way. Like just that's worth anything to me.
So is that part of the drive of like, getting away from like formally painting and getting into comics? I mean, I don't want to do the boring, like, how did you get into comics, question, but like, was that part of it? Was like searching for that laugh? I mean, was that part of the driver into getting into like more narrative?
Yeah, it's really hard to make like a funny painting that's funny every time you look at it. I mean, because comics, you can read them many times. But a painting, it has to be this object that like holds up and sort of you want to look at it all the time, or just have it in the background or whatever. And punchlines definitely, like, I don't know, they don't work in the same way. They work in a different time frame. And I didn't know how to be funny with visual art for a really long time. I felt like people didn't understand my paintings for a long time. Even if I liked them or got some positive feedback, I just felt like I didn't feel like people really got them, or they're getting them wasn't as close to my intent. And then when I started doing, it was when I started like writing a blog, I felt like, oh, people are actually getting what I'm saying. They're getting that I'm being funny in the way I combine like words and pictures. And I didn't know what comics, like indie comics, I had no idea that they existed. I did, all this blogging, thinking like that was the closest thing to an art form where you combine text and images, in funny ways. And then when Scott was like, I think you should start comics, then I, took one comics course and learned like, oh my God, for like 10 years, all these people have been doing this thing that is exactly what I wanted to do. So yeah, humor for sure.
So, I mean, were you like always a funny person? I mean, did that like predate the art, or like where does that come from, like in your life and in your soul?
In my soul. Well, like my family is very funny, and I never thought I was funny. I mean, I always tried to be entertaining and stuff, and I always was aware of like timing and I can't say the word, succinctness. Like, which I'm not being succinct at all right now. But I don't know, like there were lots of people in my family, I mean, that are funny, all in different ways. Some are more like obvious joke tellers, and some use timing more, and some it's more about facial expression or whatever. But like that's always been a thing, and to me that's always been like the best kind of attention you could possibly get, is to make people laugh. Like there's no other attention that's as satisfying as that. I mean, it's almost like, it's not competitive in my family, but it was like always like something I think most of us were striving for, is to like see who could be the funniest.
And so that was like a natural thing for you to just like work into your work then? Because it's like, because I find for me, it's like I don't trust myself as an artist, like as a writer, to be funny, because I sort of feel like, I can be kind of funny like in person and when I'm in conversation, like one-on-one with people. But then like when I sit down and try to write, it just becomes the most earnest bullshit of all time. So I find like I have trouble like, translating that like personal social comedy into actual work. I mean, even Brian and I like laugh about like how earnest our music is all the time, that it's just all about feelings. Even though I think we're both funny people, so I think the fact that like, you were able to like translate that successfully into your artwork, I mean, is not nothing. I mean, it's pretty significant achievement.
Well, I guess like, you all have different priorities. Like to me, I always like, well, I don't know. I mean, I should have different priorities. Like you are one of the most like thoughtful, considerate, nice people I know. And like, obviously that is a priority for you. Like, and probably has been forever. Like you probably were like such a nice kindergartner, making sure everybody like, had what they needed, I can like picture it. But that should be a bigger priority for me. Like I'm not a very good person. But like, I don't know, we all just like do what we can. I don't know why that is, I don't know if it's because like, I think it's always been a priority, and it's something I've always like been aware of, the fact that I could be like more like just better. But for whatever reason, I've chosen to strive to be funny. But I still feel bad about not being good enough.
Those things are mutually exclusive. I mean, I think that comedy is one of the highest healings that there can be. I mean, when you bring amusement to a situation, I mean, the way that can like break through a block of energy is sometimes way more effective and way more succinct, to use your word, than like trying to like talk someone through what their damage is or whatever. It's like talking and talking and talking about being nice sometimes isn't as effective as just like one strategically placed like joke can change the whole mood of an entire room,
Well, yeah, we all, whatever, it's all, I think you just have to look at who you are. I mean, you talk about like finding your own authentic work, like your authentic way of being in the world. Some people are more caring than others. And some people are smarter than others, and some people are better looking and whatever. And I think like our culture has this, back to perfectionism, like you should be everything, and especially for women, like I really felt when I was in college, like I could not possibly have a career as a painter that would be anywhere close to like as full as a man could, and then like the few women who did seem to be very successful as artists were like very, very sexy. It was so much about like them being a particular type of woman. And I just always felt that way. If you watch any movie, book, whatever, from that time, it was so much about like being a successful person on all fronts. Like you had to have all the skills, and I felt like that after having Zia too, because I felt like to be a good mom, like I didn't feel like you had to have all the skills, but I felt like the skill set that you needed to have to be regarded highly in society as a good mom has shifted to yet another thing that I couldn't be. Because it was like, okay, not to be a perfectionist in the sense that like your hair could be a mess, you could be disorganized, you know, like you could make certain mistakes, but you had to be cool, and like not anxious and not like overly reactive or overly emotional, you know, like you just had to be like very likable, and cool. And I'm not. I was not able to be cool then because I was like super stressed out, you know, and I'm so uptight about so many things, and I still am. And it makes people uncomfortable, you know, like nobody wants to be around somebody who's, you know, panicking and anxious and all that stuff. And I think because my comics are casual and I'm very intentionally like portraying all those times of like being relaxed and letting things go and whatever. I think sometimes people, when they're around me, are like thrown off when they realize that I have problems that my character doesn't have, you know, that I'm very anxious, that I'm very insecure about things, that I don't have the confidence that my character seems to have, that I do get embarrassed and all the stuff, and that I do like mean things. My character is never mean. I mean, she is, but not in like a real way, you know, like if I really hurt someone's feelings, I would never write about that. I would never be able to do that. Some people do, you know, but to me, it's just like, I'm just going to keep feeling bad about this for a really long time, and I can't really think about it, you know, and I certainly don't want to draw it and have to look at it again.
I'm just going to store this in the closet for the foreseeable future. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, like, I'm like very much against idealization, but in a sense, my comics are like the idealized version of my life, you know, because I've left out all the things that like truly bother me, persistently. I know we've gotten totally off topic. I know I didn't answer your question.
No, but I think I think it's all kind of connected though. I mean, your honesty in the way that you draw, and in, like I was saying, these sort of between the moments, and then connecting that to comedy. Like, I think that just all comes down to your unique ability to I don't know, like, is transparent, like, is that the wrong word for how you feel like you are? Because it's, obviously, like you were just saying, that there's stuff that you're never going to draw, or you're never going to, incorporate that into the way that you do your public facing art. But I do feel like then the moments that you do hone in on, there's like a unique transparency. Like that's the best word I can come up with right now for the illusion of sort of letting people in. And I guess that's what all art is like the illusion of letting people in. But I don't know. I feel like you're really uniquely good at that in the lack of vanity, and the way that you were able to harness that and sort of lock that into the comedy. So I don't know if there's a question there, but I feel like you answered whatever it was I was asking.
This is working out well. I'll just talk for a really long time about any old thing, and then you can formulate a statement afterwards. And to clarify, Keiler just said something that meant this.
Well, I'm like your hype man. Like I can come into your into your classroom and be like, yo, she said it. Like, well, just quickly before we go, I mean, one of the other things that has allowed us to get to know each other is our physical proximity to each other. Again, not while we're under coronavirus quarantine, but the fact that I live in Rogers Park in the north side of Chicago, and you live in Evanston, and I would just love if you wanted to speak a little bit about the Evanston arts scene. I mean, because it's really intense. I had Gene Cannonberg a couple weeks ago on the show, and there's so many other artists that I hopefully in the future will have on the podcast here. And just the richness of the scene in Evanston. If you wanted to speak a little bit to how you feel that you and Scott are a part of that.
Um, we, it's strange. Yes, I think there's a lot of creators in Evanston, and I'm not nearly as connected as I could be. Um, I mean, Emile Ferris, is here. I just finally met her in person for like 2 minutes of glorious like in person time. We were at the Art Institute, so not anywhere near our stomping ground, but yeah, I I feel. I mean, we have a couple friends that we see all the time, that are illustrator artists. But I don't get to hang out with cartoonists. And I mean, Chicago is full of them. And even like at the School of the Art Institute, I'm sharing a desk with all these great people, but we teach on different days, so I never get to see them. I mean, Anya Davison is teaching there, Beth Hetland, Mike Freiheit, Jeffrey Brown, who I've never met in person, and yet we're like sharing the same pen probably sometimes. I would love for something more to happen. Yes, in the future when we can all be in the same room at the same time. I haven't been able to do a lot of Chicago events just because, driving and nighttime and childcare and a million other factors. I'm making this so boring. Yes, there's a lot of creative people here. I wish I could be more connected to them. A lot of my close relationships, I spend a huge amount of time on the phone. And I think that's kind of unusual. I've had friends move away, recently, and I've stayed like very much in touch with them. My parents don't live in town. I haven't been driving long distances or traveling for a while. And I make phone dates with people, for like an hour or an hour and a half, and I walk and talk. And so I'm already used to like being in really close contact. I have pen pals. I have people that I email. I mean, including you and Brian, even though we live close to each other. I feel like we've had so many nice long emails, keeping touch. I don't know. I think the way we can connect with technology is like astounding, and it really can feel personal. I mean, texts, can feel like a nuisance sometimes, but they also can like really be a way to touch someone. I don't know. I value in-person time and community, but I also, you make your community wherever you go.
No, that's true. That's a really, really good point. Well, Keiler, speaking of community, like the community of people listening here are going to want to know where to find more about your work. If you would like to shout out anything that you have coming up in the future that you want to let people know about.
Yeah, thanks. So my website is sort of a place to get to everything else, but it's just KeilerRoberts.com. And I use Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that, which is all sort of linked from that. So Rat Time is my most recent book. My last 3 books were published by Koyama Press, and they are available anywhere you would want to buy a book. I don't know if everybody knows this, but you can order any book from any bookstore. So if you are interested in supporting your indie local bookstores, even if it's not like a comic shop, you can go and order any book, and that's a great way to promote them. Better World Books is a online non-for-profit bookseller, and I think they even have free shipping for at least, I don't know, you don't have to order a lot to get it. And you can donate used books, and they support literacy programs. It's like such a good alternative to Amazon. But Amazon, of course, has my books. I mean, you can get them, you can order them online through Target, through Barnes & Noble, through like Walmart, through anything. But also libraries. Libraries all over the country have my books. And if you want to support cartoonists or writers, the people whose work you like, almost every public library has a page where you can request purchases. And I do this, I make sure that my library has, the comics of my friends, if they didn't already buy them, you just put in a request and they often will buy the book, but it has to be like out, recently and have a couple of reviews. But yeah, read comics. Support us just by, like most cartoonists aren't in it for the money. We make very little money. Most of us, it's attention. And so like, I would never want somebody to feel like you should have absolutely no embarrassment about like, I read your book as a library book, I didn't want to spend the money on it. That would never bother me. It's like so meaningful that somebody read my book. I don't care where they got it or how they got it or if they borrowed it from a friend or whatever.
And so do you have anything coming up that you want to shout out? Any new projects or any talks or anything?
Yeah, nothing. I'm working on 2 books. I'm getting closer to the end and hopefully they'll both be out. They're scheduled 2021, but I don't have anything. I'm waiting for my contracts. So I have to do paperwork before any big announcements can be made. But yeah, I'm working. I've got like 100 pages done on the next comic. So definitely there will be another book out that's similar to Rat Time in the somewhat near future. And I'm working on a children's book my brother wrote at Lee Sensenbrenner, and it's and I illustrated it, and it's going to be great and funny and something different for me. Yeah, but I think it'll appeal to a lot of the same people who like, my comics.
Awesome. Well, people should just follow you on social media regardless so that they can find out about those things when they appear in the world soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
So I'll be sure. Yeah, I'll put links to your site and all those things in my show notes so people can find them easily.
Thank you.
Cool.
And I don't know. I want to plug your earlier episodes of this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. Sure, yeah.
I've been really enjoying listening to them. I mean, this is like, I always wonder when I'm listening to them, like what your whole relationship is with each of your guests. And I think about that in podcasts in general, but I mean, we're obviously friends. I'm saying this to the people. We hang out. We're I'm more connected to you guys, you and Brian, in terms of just like local community than most people around.
Well,
the area.
Yeah, and we love you guys, and we're happy to be close, and yeah, we always cherish the time that we get to spend with you. So I was super happy that you wanted to chat on the podcast, but like you said, we would have been having these kind of conversations anyway.
That's great. All right. Well, take care. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Oh, thank you, Keiler.
So, if it wasn't already abundantly clear, let me just say how much I deeply admire Keiler as an artist and as a human being. It's not often that I get to be friends with someone who I first became acquainted with through their work, so I do not take our friendship for granted in the slightest. We didn't get a chance to mention it in our chat, but Keiler also designed the cover art for my partner Brian Kremens' first book, Captain Marvel and the Art of Nostalgia. It's just about as weird a book cover as you can get while still being publishable in the best way possible. Brian always describes the cover as the actual first page of the book, and if you ever get a chance to read it, and I think that you should, you'll see that it's totally true. In the meantime, be sure to check out Keiler's books, which are all tender and awkward and funny and bursting with truth about life and relationships. You can find out more about them online on her website, which is KeilerRoberts.com, or you can follow her on Instagram, where she is at KeilerJean. Links to all this information is available in the show notes on my blog, queenofpeaches.com. And again, if you're in social isolation mode here in the spring of 2020, I have a small but growing backlog of episodes that you can stream on your favorite podcast app. Just search for I'll Follow You. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.